Welcome back to Are We Fucked? The podcast that asks the big terrifying questions so you don't have to. I'm Lisa Camillo, anthropologist, filmmaker, and your slightly panicked but still holding on guide through the collapsing mall of late-stage capitalism. This week's episode is for anyone who's ever wondered, what if the answer isn't more, but way, way less? Enter Parrique, Timothée, French economist, researcher, degrowth specialist, and yes, somehow also a surfer. He's the king of degrowth, and he's here to crush your GDP dreams and hand you something far more radical, a plan. Not the kind of Excel sheet and visions boards. No, we're talking about macroeconomic diet. His vision of a cleanse for bloated economies and runaway greed. Every country should be on it, but like most diets, we're all pretending we'll start on Monday. In this episode, Timothée breaks it down with 3 life-saving verbs. Avoid, substitute, improve. Sounds simple, right? That's how genius works. Oh, and don't be fooled by his soft French accent and chill surfer vibes. He might look like he just got out of the ocean, but what he's actually doing is surfing the death spiral of neoliberalism with grace and terrifying precision. So buckle up, or better yet, ditch the seatbelt because we're not speeding up, we're slowing way down. Welcome to the Gospel of Degrowth. Let's go. Welcome, Timothée Chalamet.
Hello.
Hello, Timothée Parrique. How are you?
The other Timothée.
The better
I'm
one.
very fine.
How are you today?
I'm good, thanks.
You well?
And
Great.
you?
Very well, thank you. Where are you right now?
I'm chatting from the beach in the southwest of France. It's a town called Anglet, a little surfing paradise. That's where I live most of the year.
So my guess is that you are a surfer.
Yes, I surf every day.
Nice.
Except today because the ocean was completely flat.
Thank you, Ocean. So are you this side or our side or the Atlantic side?
I'm on the Atlantic side.
Okay, so bigger waves for sure. What sort of
Yes.
boards do you surf? Minimals or are you very good?
Oh, so now you're just catching me. I wish I could play the minimalist card, being like only have one board. But no, I do have a few. When you're living here and you have so many different kind of waves, you need at least a small quiver of boards. I only have 3 boards, and I share a few rare boards with a few of my friends. But so some people I know are more like 7, 8, 9 boards. So I'm
God.
considered a minimalist in the craft of surfing.
You're the degrowth minimalist as a border.
Exactly.
Do you talk about degrowth to them? Are they interested in it at all? Or they're like, oh yeah, it's Timothée's usual...
Honestly, I try not to. I mean, it's my daily job to research degrowth, to talk about it. So I do this most days. So when I go to dinner with my friends and family, the last thing I want to do is just repeat my little work spiel. So if they do read my work and watch some of my videos, and when they have very specific questions, they do ask me. But I try not to bring that work topic during parties.
Yeah, because when I do talk about climate change, they kind of go like, oh no, not again. Please just, time to be a party pooper, because then I get upset when people don't listen and just panic as I do.
So what's your trick?
I'm just going to go have a drink and cool down. I try to avoid now, because otherwise I'm not going to be very popular anymore, especially as we're getting worse and worse and people are more in denial. You know what? Listen to my podcast instead.
You know, I found a nice trick over the year is just to ask them for their postal address. I mean, not my friends, but people you meet at a party and you get into a heated disagreement and I'm like, give me your postal address and I'll send you something nice. And you send them a nice book. And, you know, sending a book is such a heavy power of kindness. Not only sending the link to something online, just you took the time to actually post an actual book to them. And so they will feel so guilty of just not looking at it. And they'll be like, okay, well, what is that? Naomi Klein, Capital of the Climate. Okay, I'll have a look at it. And then they will be forced next time they see you. You'll be like, oh, what did you think of the book? So you social pressure them into reading stuff they would have not read otherwise. It's my evil plan.
I love that because I tend to be too nice. I did write a book as well. It was published. It was everywhere. And now I just feel like I don't want to impose, but I think I should impose. Because then when they read it, they're like, oh, actually, that's really good. I was surprised. I was like, and then I get offended. I'm like, what do you mean? is actually good. Are you surprised? Whatever. All right, let's get back to this podcast. Let's start with the question I asked all my guests. So are we fucked, Timothée?
So Timothée says, if we were truly fucked, I would not be here. I would actually just be on the beach right now, just, playing chess and surfing all day long, doing music and not caring about writing books or recording podcasts. So I think if we rather see it as a we are fucked spectrum, like let's say every year as we continue to deny our overshooting of planetary boundaries, we're getting more and more into ecological troubles.
You have a factometer.
I love it. Exactly. And 50 years ago, in the 1970s, when people started to talk about environmentalism and sustainable development and limits to growth, there was like, I think we're heading towards a point where we will be fucked. Now we know that this point has been reached. And Johan Rockström, perhaps some of us listening know him, this Swedish scientist, which has crafted the planetary boundaries framework at the end of the 2000s, just gave a TED talk at the end of July, basically answering this question. I mean, that guy's been for the last decades following the debate, and he's like, the situation is much worse than what we thought. And when you say we, means like the entirety of all sustainability scientists on Earth. So what we know about the planetary system is much worse than anticipated. But of course, I think our responsibility as scientists and intellectuals and artists in general working on this is just to take the situation as it is. So it is terrifying me that perhaps in 50 years' time, we will still be having this conversation. Instead of just saying we've not been doing anything for the last 50 years, we will be saying we've not done anything for the last century. But I guess each generation is having to deal with its own Rubik's Cubes, and ours is on fire, which
it doesn't help.
Is quite more difficult to solve than the one 50 years ago, but that's ours.
But I'm glad that you're that positive, that you think we have 50 years. That's really cute. We don't even have 30 years. We have 30 years. I don't know. Let's hope.
Oh, sorry. I'm not saying like we have 50 years as a kind of like, breathing room for action.
Yeah.
I'm just saying we've been doing nothing for the last 50 years. And so the situation now is extremely worse. And the business as usual scenario is actually to keep doing nothing for an extra 50 years. So obviously, if we're serious about sustainability, we need to act now. And the transition is so much difficult than it was 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. So it's something outrageously difficult, but it will never be as easy as today.
Yeah. So why it's more difficult? It is because we have too much now. It's hard to go back to simplicity as we had at least in the 50s. Is that it?
Well, there's first the notion here we need to understand is of planetary stability. Sustainability scientists, they study the health and stability of Earth systems like the climate. And these systems have threshold points after which they start to malfunction. So the climate, you emit greenhouse gases into them. And if you emit too much greenhouse gases, then that climate warms and we have a lot of negative consequences.
Yeah.
We can estimate that carbon budget, meaning that the maximal threshold of carbon we can safely emit into the atmosphere. As soon as you have a budget, it means you can estimate, let's say, how long you have to keep functioning at the current rate. So basically, if we keep emitting as much greenhouse gases as we're emitting today, we have 5 years left to reach the kind of threshold of 1.5 degree warming. So that's kind of concerning. If we had started the transition 30 years ago, we'd have had the privilege of being, we can take it slow, we can still drive a bit, we can still fly a bit, we can still eat a bit of meat, it's fine, we can just have this slow transition over a decade, a very easy ski slope. Yeah. Now it's not the easy ski slope is not available. We only have the Black Diamond slope, the one that is super steep with rocks and with ice, and that's the only way to avoid 1.5 degree warming or other threshold for other endangered ecosystems. That's what makes it tricky. Because for me as an economist, when you tell me we need to have a very rapid societal transition, so change the way we eat, we move, we work, we house ourselves in a matter of like 5 years instead of 50 years, well, that's an entirely different challenge.
So first, let's go through what are the steps that we need to do in order to achieve that within 5 years. How much do we need to stop doing things like flying?
So there's a typology that is being used in IPCC reports for a while, and that's the one of avoid, substitute, and improve. So they're the kind of things that we should avoid doing in the first place, that we can completely stop. The kind of stuff that we cannot stop, but we can substitute, so find different ways of doing them. And the things that we cannot either avoid or substitute, we can only improve. Right now, I'm not in your living room. I didn't take a plane to come record that podcast in Sardinia with you. It would have been very nice, but we avoided. How did we avoid this? We found a substitute that is less carbon intensive. We're recording it online. And of course, we can keep improving that substitute. I guess if both our electricity comes from renewable sources, if that will be better than if our electricity come from like coal. So you can see here the way we think something as simple as this little activity we're doing of recording a podcast. We see that there's different variants of how to just minimize the impact it has on our carbon budget.
I love it.
The way I see it now is just the challenge is to make these different families of trying to identify goods and services that have a very high footprint that we can easily avoid. So beef is a good example. So beef is something you can easily just stop eating and nothing will happen in your diet. You can even eat other forms of meat, or you can switch to a vegetable diet. You will keep having the same lifestyle as you do. But then we will drastically reduce our carbon emissions because beef is more than half of emissions linked to agriculture in France. And I think that's the same in most countries that eat a lot of beef. So that's something easily avoidable. And then, the way there are certain things that are more difficult to avoid that we need to really improve. There are certain societies where mobility, in thinking of the US, I'm thinking of Australia, I'm thinking of Canada, which is not the same deal as Denmark and Sweden, where you can easily live without a car.
Yeah.
So in that case, countries have managed to avoid car use. Let's say in Denmark, have introduced alternative modes of mobility. Other countries have not. So Denmark has the possibility right now to just use less cars because they have available public transport. The US has not. So here we see that each territory is basically starting from a different kind of Rubik's cubes, and we'll have to sort out this kind of avoid, substitute, and improve. The hypothesis I've been exploring in my work is taking these high-income countries as a category, so a minority of countries in the world, but rich countries, and looking at all the things they will avoid, substitute, and improve. And if they want to get back into the green, so what we call within planetary boundaries, if they want to respect their water, their carbon, their soil, their biodiversity budgets, they will need to avoid so much that this will, in aggregate, degrow their economy.
How would you implement that? So at a smaller scale and at a bigger scale?
It's degrowth, just like economic growth, is a macroeconomic implications. So if you look at what we do in the economy, consumers buy stuff, companies sell stuff, government regulate the economy so that consumers can buy stuff and producers can sell stuff. And that's something we're actively trying to get, is growing GDP, domestic product.
Yeah.
So first would be to change the strategy to be, okay, you know what? For a few years, we're going to enter into a macroeconomic diet where the goal is not going to be to grow GDP anymore. The very first goal of public and private policy for a few years is going to be to reduce environmental footprints, meaning that, consumers,
okay, I love it,
the way they buy, producers, the way they sell, and government, the way it regulate the economy, will have to change. We published a paper with a few colleagues 2 years back answering that very question. And we identified 80 instruments to basically make degrowth happen within an economy. It's just to say that it's something extremely complicated because an economy is something extremely sophisticated. It's a very huge Rubik's Cube. So if you want to completely change, let's say if you see the economy as a ship, and you're saying, we want to slow down the ship and also change direction, you have a lot of things to think about.
Too much ocean?
I'm closing the window because you can hear the wind. And the seagulls are not welcome to that podcast. I'm sorry.
Sorry, seagulls.
Stealing the show.
Exactly. Come on. Actually, funny thing, my parents have been noticing because they've been out on the boat for quite a while now. They're saying, there is not many seagulls left. It's so weird. They used to be full in the Mediterranean, now hardly any. And I think that's probably connected to the fish that is not there anymore. But anyway, it's a little parenthesis, very scary parenthesis, talking about seagulls.
I find it very scary too. You've perhaps seen that diagram online where they show first wave is the wave of COVID. The second wave, bigger one, is the wave of climate change. And there's a third wave, even bigger that represent
Yeah.
biodiversity loss. And my friends who are natural scientists, biologists, climatologists, hydrologists, ecologists in general, that study the functioning of Earth systems, they are terrified. For them, biodiversity loss, let's say the massive acceleration of the death of living organism on Earth, is the biggest threat to humanity and to planetary stability. When we transform the economy today, it's going to be complicated. But let's not spend 1 or 2 decades transforming the economy to decarbonize the economy and then realize we need to do it again to make sure the economy is not destroying biodiversity. And then we need to do it again to make sure that it sustainably uses water. Let's just sit down and be like, we need to transform the economy so that it's ecologically sustainable, meaning that it respects all the planetary boundaries at once. Healthy soil, sustainable use of water, healthy biodiversity, stable climate, stable oceans, all of that at once. That's why I keep using the Rubik's Cubes, because it shows that we have different colors to deal with. Carbon is only one color among many.
Wow, profound. Okay, I love this metaphor. Really, really cool. And it really shows how complex it is. You mentioned just now about the fact that we need to have a few years of degrowth and not showing the GDP, how much is working well or not for each country. We have the great example of Bhutan, which looks at the happiness growth instead of the GDP. But how do you convince politicians? Because they only have a few years, politicians. So they want to show that they're all growing economies, that all doing so well. So that's the part that I think it's going to be tricky. Is there a way to solve that? Because they're all selfish and they just want to show how great they've been for the economy.
Well, I mean, first, we must acknowledge that there's been different groups of politicians that have given varying degrees of importance to this. I'm thinking of, for example, what's been called the Wellbeing Economy Governments Alliance. That is a group of a few governments, including Iceland, Scotland, Canada, New Zealand, Finland, that have created this coalition to create alternative indicators of GDP. So you've mentioned the Gross National Happiness Indicators, which has been introduced in 2008, which is a dashboard including 33 indicators. It's not part of that Wellbeing Alliance, but it's a good example. There's been the Wellbeing Budget, introduced in New Zealand in 2019, they have replaced GDP by a dashboard of 65 indicators of social and ecological health. We can point to the 39 indicators of the Icelandic dashboard, which is called Wellbeing Indicators, which has been proposed in 2019. Also like the Scottish indicator, which comprise 81 metrics. It's called the National Performance Framework. So we must already realized that several governments have already introduced alternative indicators. And now it's a matter of understanding how do these governments manage to shift, and are they happy with it? Or is the government of New Zealand crying over, oh, we want to bring GDP back. We're so unhappy since we have the well-being budget. I don't think so.
Yeah,
I think what these governments realized is that if you're a government, what you want out of these indicators, you want information about your country and how it's doing. If you just look at GDP, you get crap information. You get just because GDP is a very old and limited indicator. Now, when New Zealand evaluate prosperity and it looks at these 65 indicators, it gets so many fine data about, happiness, about the quality of public services, about the health of ecosystems. And so you can really, truly do better public policy with these kind of information. So I think over the years, there's a bit of prisoner's dilemma and social pressure in the sense of, countries, they will be a bit shy, but I'm absolutely certain that in a few years, that will rather be the rule rather than the exception, and that the countries that stuck with GDP will be considered completely backward and outdated.
Absolutely. Oh, I really hope so. I love that you think so. So that gives me a little bit less anxiety if you think they can work and can be applied to all other countries, because the countries you mentioned, for me, are the smart countries. But we are the dumb countries, like Italy, the UK, the US. We are just so backwards in terms of wanting to apply those amazing other indicators that we're just only caring, unfortunately, how the economy goes. So how to convince also the dumb countries like us, like Italy and the US and the UK?
And I mean, since 2016, the Italian National Statistics organization responsible for national statistics has developed what they call the Equitable and Sustainable Wellbeing Dashboard, which comprises 130 indicators of social and ecological well-being. And that was introduced in 2016. So here we have the example of like the data are available, but the government has just decided not to give it importance. And that's where I think we need to have citizen mobilizations to be like, well, prosperity in the 21st century will not be defined with an indicator that was designed by one dude in the US in the 1930s. We want a new, updated definition of prosperity that reflect who we are, our identity, our aspirations. And we know it from all survey now, like the aspiration of people living now, and especially younger people, they care about the state of the planet. So if that's a sociological truth, it is normal that we integrate indicators into our dashboards. So I think here people should just see grand questions of coming out with new indicators as a kind of democratic protocol where we're taking agency over the kind of society we want to live in. And so the indicators of prosperity, the way we measure performance at the level of the company you work, at the level of the city where you live or the neighborhood where you live, and of course in the country where you are a citizen, these are discussions that we need to open up and have citizen assemblies, for example, is a very good protocol in order to invite experts to know what data and indicators are available and let citizens discuss and decide what indicator do we want in the mix and how shall we prioritize it. It's fine to have a dashboard where you have social indicators about inequality, access to social housing, health levels, and you have economic indicators about employment and about, total national income, and you have ecological indicators about biodiversity and water quality and local pollution. But now we also need to put them in order, meaning like in the next 5 years, in your city, in your company, in your country, what is the priority? If you have a conflict between one economic indicator, let's say national income, so GDP, and let's say carbon emissions, which one will you choose? Will you decide to boost GDP, even though that just, overuse your carbon budget? Or will you decide to decarbonize your economy, even though that lowers GDP? So far, governments, even the most advanced governments like New Zealand and others that I've mentioned, they are having their dashboards, but they've not really acted on the implications to make these tough decisions, like I've said, about an economy deciding to go into degrowth mode, which basically means like, okay, guys, in order to lower our ecological footprint, we will sacrifice, it's not really the best word here, but we will accept the fact that we need to organize a downscaling of production and consumption for a certain number of years.
I still struggle to think that countries like Italy, for example, that now has a really right-wing government can embrace that because they're not smart enough. I don't know, maybe the French politicians have degrees. In Italy, we don't. Can you believe it? Our prime minister doesn't have a degree.
Just a small commentary on the current French politics right now is also depressing, but at least a bit entertaining. Our Minister of Economy, Bruno Le Maire, has a degree in literature, so he's a novelist. And he's still publishing novels, actually, as just being also being like Minister of the Economy, which is being terrible as his job. You could say that's my personal opinion as an economist, is being a terrible economist because he was trained as a novelist. I think somehow we need to think this as a societal transition. The government is a very good muscle, but a very poor brain. So we should not expect any government ever to be the bearer of a vision, of a utopian vision. These always come from civil society. They are bottom-up ideals that come from artists, from scientists, from intellectuals, from local communities that are trying new stuff. In Italy, let's remember that at the beginning of the 2000s, when the concept of décroissance was born in France, like the first country that really embraced the concept was Italy. With the concept of decrescita.
Decrescita.
Yeah. So there was a creation of even two national movements in Italy around the idea of degrowth, which gave light to a lot of local initiatives around local food circuit, local currencies, not-for-profit cooperatives, a lot of stuff that were already happening for a very long time. So I think right now that's our little treasure trove. we know, and that's true for many countries in the world, that we have available alternatives. They have already invented what we call a post-growth, post-capitalist economy. Tim Jackson, the British economist, would call them economies that can prosper without growth. They already exist, but they're so tiny and local. So we have the brain, but we need the muscle of the state to muscle up big corporations that keep destroying the world, to water and bring nutrient and protection to all these small bottom-up initiatives that are slowly growing to become a viable alternative economic system.
How would you do the first one, the one about corporations? Is it really working or is it just greenwashing?
Well, I mean, it's not working. This we know. Since global emissions are still increasing, no country in the world has managed to completely decarbonize their economy. The idea of green growth is pretty much a myth. If I were, an economist working for a government, or even better, a group of governments, I would just regulate companies to be like, if you're a fossil fuel company, you cannot individually distribute profits. End of the line. No one in the midst of a climate crisis should be able to profit from selling fossil fuel. The only reason why today we keep extracting fossil fuel and selling it, it's because it's profitable. And when I say it's profitable is not a collective thing. It's profitable meaning if you're an individual and you put your savings into a company that extract and sell fossil fuels, you will have a return on investment. You will get richer. And so if the government steps in and be like, guys, what we need to do now is decarbonize the economy. We won't be able to do this if capitalists keep investing their money into extracting and selling more and into lobbies to protect this industry from being constrained in their ability to extract and sell fossil fuels. And so one way of doing this is to be for a period of transition, all profit made in extracting fossil fuels, because of course that's not going to be able to stop right now. It's going to be invested into climate reparation, climate mitigation, climate adaptation. And this completely changing the hierarchy of investment decisions.
Interesting.
I mean, what would you do if you had a magic wand?
I'll probably remove greed from the world because I think that's the most evil thing.
How do you do that though?
Oh, if I have a magic wand, what are you talking about? I'm like a magician. I'm Harry Potter.
You extract it from human nature.
The gene. Maybe I would be a genetist. Genetist? Gene? What do you call it?
I'm thinking geneticist, but that's probably not correct. Well, listeners, let us know.
Yes. Put in the comments. Maybe that's the secret, is removing the gene of greed and stupidity.
But that's one funny thing, because as a social scientist, I've been working a lot on trying to evaluate where greed comes from. And when we read work we have available in anthropology, in sociology, in psychology, so social science have really been carefully paying attention to human behavior, we see that greed does not originate from something universal and intangible into our nature. It is rather the result of specific institutions, meaning the way we organize human relations. So for example, if you have an economy, you have for-profit firms that compete on markets for financial performance. If you live in a society where everything you need to satisfy, you need to buy with money, obviously you're going to be a bit greedy in the sense of you want money to buy the best for your kids, for your friends, for where you live, for your house, all that stuff. It's not really greed in the sense of if you need anything, you need money. And so therefore money is constructed as an object of desire. But if you move to another society, and here we can just compare, for example, an hyper-commercialist society like the US to a slightly less commoditized society like France, where let's say in France, you don't need money for healthcare because you have a public healthcare system or education. So in that sense, it's easier to be less greedy in France because you will have guaranteed healthcare and education. That's socially organized. Whether in the US, if you have to choose your job, let's say you're 18 and you choose you cannot be I'm going to be a poet or, I'm going to be a flute player. No, because you're going to be I need to find a job that pays money. Otherwise, I'll never be able to pay for my bills. And then if we go to this imaginary country, let's say a post-capitalist economy, where we somehow manage to create this safety net institutions where regardless of what you do, you still have access to a basic minimum of decent housing, decent local mobility, health and education, then we can envision a society where actually monetary greed will disappear because, if you have access to your basic needs, I don't think, humans, they will just want to accumulate money if that money is just not absolutely necessary to access all the stuff you want. Actually, I think we will perhaps see something more valuable happening in the sense of we will realize that this incessant race for money making is taking us an enormous amount of time out of our days. And if we can phase it out, then we will have a lot of time available to do something else. Can be just spend time with your kids, can be surfing, can be, learning to build a bike or whatever you want, or start, a political party or a choir in your neighborhood. If we trust what sociologists and anthropologists have discovered about human nature, there's one universal rule that I think cuts across cultures, genders, age, and societies. And that's the fact that at the end of the day and at the end of our lives, what we value the most are material things. They're good, healthy relationship.
Yeah,
they're, things that make us feel like we have our life as a meaning. These can be scientific, intellectual, political, spiritual pursuit. These are all things you cannot buy. You cannot buy love. You cannot buy friendship. You cannot buy having a nice family and all of that. And so far, this is the one most solid piece of knowledge we can extract from social science. Then why are we still organizing the economy around money making? This seems a bit counterproductive.
Absolutely agree. I think greed is intrinsic to the capitalism system. Do you agree with that? Because we need to shift into more of, eco-socialism. I remember when I was doing my master, I heard eco-socialism and it really resonated with me. But I don't want to label it because the US are scared of the word socialist. It's like, oh God, it's like pestilence or whatever. But I think it's actually what we are trying to aim here, right?
Yeah, there are several words. Some people call it eco-socialism, others post-capitalism. In my crowd, we call it post-growth. Others in France call it a convivialist economy or a social and solidarity economy. Some people call it a well-being economy. So you have different words that you can pick, but I think what they have in common is, yes, a critique of the fact that capitalism, because of the way it is organized and what it is as an economic system, is intrinsically and avoidably unsustainable. That is because capitalism is a system. When you hear economic system, I want you to imagine a game that we play as adults into the economy with rules and with a goal. And the goal of capitalism is to accumulate capital. The way we define it is the mobilization of a specific factor of productions in order to produce something else. So basically, the capitalist economy, its ultimate goal is to accumulate more and more stuff that can be mobilized to accumulate more and more stuff. So you have this kind of endless growth, which, you could ask, where is it going? When is the stop button? When do you now have enough? At some point, perhaps. So capitalism is a bit of this self-driving system that doesn't really have an arrival point. So in that sense, it's a bit of a primitive system, I find it, compared to these alternative economic systems we've discussed. I've taken the time to reflect on the limits of capitalism as a system. There are certain good things about capitalism, but it has other problems. And so when we are trying to devise, I like the economist Catherine Trebeck that says, capitalism has built an economy that is very good as taking off and flying, but it has not designed the economics of arrival. Yeah, how do we land? So today we're we need to land, but we don't know how to do this. So degrowth is this bit of this landing. And as we discussed at the beginning of this podcast, it can be either very smooth and we start to do it now, or we can do it like a catastrophic landing if we wait and we do it in the midst of ecological catastrophes. And then once we've done this, we need to design an economy that can prosper without growth. So this convivialist, participatalist, eco-socialist well-being economy, where we're not redoing the mistakes of the past. So, for example, organizing production through private for-profit companies that will, compete on a market to just extract as much profit as possible. We've tried this. We know where it goes. So now we can say oh, look, in certain countries, we have these not-for-profit cooperatives and these social enterprises that are also doing production like any company, but they're doing it with different rules, with social and ecological indicators that constrain them to do production in a specific way. And then you can ask yourself, maybe these new alternative post-capitalist institutions, they are better adapted to the world to this new economy we want to build. So it's not science fiction if it already exists. It requires a bit of imagination to, let's say, imagine an economy where most companies would be social, not-for-profit cooperatives compared to, massive for-profit corporations, but it's not completely Black Mirror-ish either.
Yeah, it's true. Absolutely. But what is the timeline? So you mentioned, we can start within 5 years to make it not as abrupt, but I think we need to do it now and we need to do it fast. How soon do we need to stop everything, or as much as possible?
I mean, it's like yesterday. That's the deadline. Unfortunately, the only thing that could smoothen this transition is to invent a time machine to get back into the 70s and be like, back into the future. But okay, guys, the environmentalists are right. Do what they say. And I promise you in 50 years, you'll be
You'll be
good.
fine. Oh,
I don't think we'll have this anytime soon. So now it's a matter of just doing as fast as we can today. But then here we have different situations. Let's start by dividing the world into two categories. You have countries that have enough wealth to satisfy the needs of their population. We usually call them high-income countries. These countries, they can afford to transition very fast, and they can afford to actually reduce production and consumption a lot because they have accumulated already so much. If they distribute the wealth they have a bit more equitably, no one will be poor. If you take France, for example, even in theory, if you were to just reduce the size of the French economy by 50% right now with my magic wand, if you distribute the wealth equitably, no one in France will be poor.
Wow.
Because there's enough wealth around. There are enough houses, enough food, enough medicine, enough everything to satisfy people's need. If you take a country in the global south, like Madagascar, you cannot do this. If you produce and consume less, there will be people falling into poverty. So now we need to realize that the transition needs to be with two speed. High-income countries need to embrace degrowth strategies, so downscale production and consumption as fast as possible, so that they can actually liberate natural resources, including carbon budget, that can then be used in global south countries like Madagascar that will need, during that period of transition, to produce and consume more. So we see here it's like degrowth in the global north in order to enable the global south to have their period of transition, not to build a growth forever capitalist economy like we did, but to just build a functional well-being economy that can satisfy the well-being of their populations. And to do this, we know that you need energy and materials. You cannot do this magically. So right now, globally, since we know we're already in overshoot, we need to have this balancing mechanism where the global north can afford to just use much, much less that can liberate some resources for people that need to use a bit more or even much more than what they use currently.
Because it's fair, right? Because we as sort of more developed countries, richer countries from the West, are the ones that actually created the biggest problems in the world in terms of pollution. So it's fair that we actually reduce completely our pollution. The countries in the global south are the ones that haven't polluted at all. And so it's okay for them to grow a little bit more and pollute a little bit more to make it fair, right? Ethically.
I think so. Every time you think about a budget of something, if we have a carbon budget at the level of the planet, it means we need to find a way of sharing it. There's no way around it. You have a limited cake. It means you need to cut it in one way. Right now, we're cutting the cake in a specific way. The 10% richest people on Earth are using half of the cake of the carbon budget. When you're an economist, these are the people that need the cake the least, because carbon budget is basically, you need a lot of energy when you want to grow and develop your economy, build new stuff. But when you already have a mature economy, you should be switching to kind of maintenance mode. And so here it's weird that we actually have the richest people in the world that are using most of the energy. Should be the opposite. We should actually use most of our remaining carbon budget to get the people that are still in poverty out of poverty. So I think, there's an ethical question of how do we equitably share the natural resources we have, and especially how do we equitably share the carbon budget that we have left. And as you said, and the number is not mine, it's coming from scientists that each year calculate the carbon budget. In 5 years' time, that carbon budget will be exhausted. And so if we keep emitting, it's fine. We will just keep warming the climate. But then there's another ethical dilemma, and that's where really the problem becomes much more catastrophic. That not only are we getting most of the cake, so we get access to these resources that we actually import from countries themselves. So we import the countries, we use them, so we can have fast mobility, we can eat beef, we can construct many houses and highways and stuff like this. But then most of the consequence of these fossil lifestyles is exported to the global south. So we know now from sustainability scientists that global warming, most of its impact is being borne by the poorer countries and by the poorer communities, even in the global north and especially also in the global south. So right now, degrowth in rich countries, you could see this as a double strategy, not only of sharing more fairly, a limited precious resource, but also of limiting the damage that is now being imposed to the global south by these, what some sociologists call the impaired mode of living of the global north.
Okay, that's totally fair in that way. Okay, closing, unfortunately, our episode, I would love you to share with our listeners some little tips you can give for them to practically follow that can help with degrowth.
I'm a scientist, so the first tip I will always give is to educate yourself. These are complicated problems. When I say complicated, is that most of the stuff, I've been studying this for the last 15 years, and we think about them in a wrong manner. Like very often I prove myself wrong about these. And so it requires a lot of muscling up your critical thinking and creating some space in your life to be able to digest these ideas. Critical thinking, is not something that just happens magically when you listen to podcasts in the subway on your way to work. No, you need to create space for it, like long hours of reading, of listening, of good discussion with your friends, where you will actually take the time to internalize in the same way that you go to the gym or whatever to work out, and it doesn't happen in one day. You're not going to work out your brain in a single podcast. So I think we need to clearly invest and be like, right now, the priority is to muscle up our critical thinking. And I'm going to liberate space in order to do this. I'm going to surround myself with the people that stimulate my creativity and my critical thinking. And that will be a fantastic first step. And then I think you will be finding your own solutions to your very specific problems that, even me as a scientist, I cannot tell you what to do, and no one should be able to tell you what to do. I think create the space for critical thinking and then find your own way of solving your personal Rubik's Cube.
I love that. That's definitely something that I think everybody should embrace more. The critical thinking that is not happening enough, unfortunately. But thank you so much, Timothée. It's been very, very interesting, incredibly fascinating. And hopefully we'll get to that point where we are valuing better indicators. So I really hope it's going to happen soon. Otherwise, we are fucked. So, and our factometer, as we learned today, is going to be way too high. Thank you so much and take care.
Bye-bye. Au revoir.
Au revoir. And there you have it. Degrowth in all its terrifying, oddly liberating glory. Massive thanks to Timothée Parrique, the French economist with a surfboard and a mission to detox the planet from runaway greed. You can follow more of its brilliantly uncountable insights at timotheeparrique.com. This podcast series is produced by Against the Tide Films because if we're going down, we're at least going down thinking critically and looking good. For more info or to cry into our digital shoulder, head over to againstthetidelefilms.com. Make sure you subscribe and set a reminder so you never miss an episode. We drop them every 2 weeks, like truth bombs wrapped in eco-anxiety. Yay! Leave us a rating, tell your friends, or yell it into the void. Whatever helps. Follow us on Instagram at @wefact_the podcast for episode updates, episode clips, behind-the-scenes shenanigans, and the occasional meme that perfectly capture your existential dread. And hey, if you love this episode, you want to keep us caffeinated and capable of continuing this podcast, because good grief, the world isn't getting any saner, buy us a coffee or 3 at buymeacoffee.com/awefact_the podcast. Thank you for tuning in, climate warriors. Until next time, avoid, substitute, improve, and maybe consider breaking up with GDP. This is Lisa Camillo signing off. Take care and remember, the future is ours to shape.